Okay, perfect. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are extremely excited to have to introduce our guest speaker today, Biayna Bogosian, who's visiting us from Arizona State University. This lecture is a part of our research studio entitled Hyperreal. Jess Vanacek and myself are instructing a group of students who are working in Red Hook. And the studio is trying to take on a really interesting threshold, maybe. On the one hand side, we are trying to ask our students to develop strategies for upcoming neighborhood in Brooklyn that is up for development because the city just transferred property rights and has a huge area along the waterfront that they are intending to convert into a working waterfront district. It is also a neighborhood with a very long history and a vulnerable community. It is also vulnerable in an ecological sense because of rising sea level. So on the one hand side, they are taking on the real, including real estate dynamics, but they are also asked to develop engagement tools and visualizations that are immersive, so that specifically stakeholders who might not be so skilled to read plans and abstract drawings are more engaged in the project that they are developing. So it's a very interesting bridge that or task that we addressed in our studio brief, and we are extremely excited that we have today, also at the end of the semester, student projects are well along, that we have a guest speaker who can talk about this with a lot of detail and with a lot of experience. Special thanks also to Melissa, who highly recommended Biayna because they know each other from their past and also their present. So I want to quickly introduce our speaker. Biayna Bogosian is an interdisciplinary researcher exploring the intersection of architectural technology and spatial media to create data-driven, participatory, and citizen-centric approaches to improve the built environment. She is an assistant professor of sociology engaged design at Arizona State University, with joint appointments in the design school and in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society. Between 2019 and fall 2023, she was an assistant professor of architectural technology in Florida at FIU, and associate director of the Robotics and Digital Fabrication Lab, a position she still holds. Her research and her lab, housed at ASU Media and Immersive Experience Center, in brackets MIX, focuses on context-aware participatory architectures utilizing immersive media and AI to enhance civic engagement and environmental education through environmental data, design, and robotics. Her research is funded by agencies like the National Science Foundation, the NASA, and the APA. As an affiliate faculty member at Florida International University, where she previously held her professorship, she collaborates on integrating AI and XR technologies to improve curriculum development and teaching methods in architectural robotics. Biayna holds a PhD in media arts from USC School of Cinematic Arts and an MS from Columbia University, specializing in immersive media and architectural technology. So I think we have a real expert here and we are super excited. We asked Biayna earlier, well, our students are at the beginning of all of this. So I think the lecture today is really meant to get them on the one hand side really excited what is happening out there in the world. And if you have any tricks for beginners, that would be appreciated as well. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to join you. I've been looking forward to this, and I'm very happy that we made this work. So as you can imagine from the introduction, I am an interdisciplinary researcher, and what I'm hoping today with this talk, I'll talk a little bit about my background, which I actually had the pleasure of studying with Melissa Goldman in graduate school. And we've been, in the past week, we attended a conference and hosted a conference together that we've been reminiscing about our paths. And so I'm really excited to share some of that along with the ongoing research, and I'll also talk about the teaching. So if I may share my screen,
I will stop sharing now. So
Thank you
you
so
should be able
much.
to take over.
Going to share my main screen, and then I will begin. Along the way, I'll be also sharing a website so we can begin. So today's talk is titled Extended Reality for Environmental Engagement and Learning. And along with that, I really wanted to talk about maybe two different areas of research that I've been conducting and how I see them kind of merging and diverging in certain areas. And particularly environmental, in this case, I am referring to the natural and built environment, but also I will talk about the way that we refer to the environment when it comes to designing immersive media. So when it comes to sharing summary of my work, it is working with a lot of different headsets, a lot of different immersive media in different scales, but also kind of combination of hardware and software. So along my journey, I've taken a few years teaching myself how to, for instance, assemble sensors and sensing devices. So learning a little bit from about hardware, but also pretty much teaching myself how uh, to uh, create algorithms and develop software. So it's been a long and messy but exciting journey. And I'll be happy to talk about the difficult aspects as much as maybe the projects that I'm sharing, in the sense that these are maybe finished project, but there's been a lot of maybe unusual paths that I had to take along the way. So what that has led me along the way is the opportunity to conduct different research or teach across the globe in different cities. And a lot of these investigations have kind of range a scale of creating participatory experiences to engage the citizen, create interactive spaces that we could start to think about civic engagement, or creating teaching platform that have kind of cross different boundaries. So for instance, I'll be sharing a project that we were able to create engagement between Miami and North Africa. So it's been a very exciting way for me to begin to learn from different cultures, but also start to think about larger questions about data, about policy, about accessibility. So I'll talk about a little bit background of how I got there. So along with lovely Melissa Goldman, I graduated in 2010 from Columbia University. And that was a very pivotal year, not only for me as a recent graduate, but in conversations around data. So this was the cover of The Economist in 2010, where for the first time, conversations around IoT and big data were foregrounded. So as you can see right now, we're seeing kind of this image of somebody, in this case, dressed up like a businessman, being kind of bombarded by data. And if we kind of parallel that with current conversations about AI, maybe it's a similar sentiment. But that pretty much excited me about beginning to think about designing and thinking about built environment through data. So one thing I wanted to note also about this pivotal year 2010, around 2010, between 2010 to 2012, is when a lot of schools, such as Columbia University, established their data science and spatial science program. So for the first time, we were able to design tools or utilize tools, even in schools of architecture and urban design and planning, for us to understand what is this thing called data. So some of my early work started to look at how digital fabrication could be overlaid with data. In this case, we were looking at design of a gym in Upper East Side, and how kind of by observing the participants, we can start to create certain patterns and heighten certain relationships that could then later on turn to physical aspect and they could become physicalized. So of course, monitoring and observing sites or the site that we're building is a very big part of architecture and urban design. And that led me to a number of different projects, such as in this case, with my practice called Somewhere Something, we designed a number of skate parks that allowed us to kind of observe movement and behavior in space and turn that into form. But along the way, I realized that the type of architecture that I was engaged in building, it was looking at a data that was dynamic and then trying to turn that into something static. So then I began to engage in a number of workshops and more design build projects where started to really think about participants and participation of users along the way. In this case, in Hungary, as part of a festival called Hello Wood, we were starting to think about these pavilions that people were able to adjust along the way. At the same time, in different institutions such as ICD or MIT, they were looking at how robotics arms could, for instance, create patterns that were then shaping space. So if you're familiar with the work of ICD and the woven pavilions, this was a really exciting time where robotic fabrication was introduced. Or let's say in mediated matter group at MIT, Neri Oxman was looking at how to create weaving patterns using, let's say, programming silk or silk material. So with my colleague Jose Sanchez, who currently teaches at Taubman University of Michigan, we started to think about how do we bring in participation in construction of maybe similar threaded structure. So here we designed a structure with and provided a number of rules to participants and started to observe the patterns that were being emerged. So in this case, we would show up to different galleries with a skeleton, and then people would create their patterns along the way. So these are some examples of different patterns, and here you'll see the rules that were given to the participants. And that led to a number of public installations, in this case in Culver City in Los Angeles, to display student projects. And they all kind of took form by providing participants certain number of guidelines and kind of standing back and observing the behavior. But that was the time where I also started to think about the slowness of fabrication, often even with the engagement of participants, and the reality of the rapidly changing and urgency of immediate and imminent environmental issues that deeply concern me. So I started to completely think about maybe if I want to explore these elements, what would be maybe a right academic setting for me to explore this? So I joined USC School of Cinematic Arts, where I decided that for a few years, begin to learn storytelling and communication techniques, and also information representation techniques from people that in School of Cinema, and also be place myself in an institution that was quite well funded, because unfortunately the reality that we're facing in a lot of schools of architecture is that when it comes to resources of research, schools of architecture don't always get the kind of first say in the centers and places that we're constructing. That decision also embarked me on very interesting maybe relationship to fundraising and funding, which is maybe something that you'll see throughout my presentation, because I really think that for us to be engaged in conversations about future of our built environment, we need to become a little bit more maybe another way of saying, we need to be less shy about funding and how we engage with research in a larger scale, and whether that's interdisciplinary or within our discipline. So that's something that I'm always advocating for, which is transparency about how projects are funded, but also creating ways that we could join forces and learn how to actually secure funding for us to do fundamental research that we can build on. So another thing that at the time really for me was interesting was the establishment of these series of guidelines, which for most of us we're familiar with. This called Sustainable Development Goal, or UN SDGs. And UN SDGs, which were kind of officially released in 2015, and previously they were titled Millennial Development Goals, were a way for many of us to kind of come to the table, and for different countries and for different organizations to commit to shared goals and commit to overcoming these wicked problems. So these problems that are often too difficult for one country, one organization. And what was really fascinating about the establishment of this UN SDG was the fact that in a sense, we had to kind of agree on a graphic language, a certain color, and it pretty much like made the problems a little bit more scary. And I've been really fascinated with the way that we choose to often engage with representation, even when we're trying to communicate maybe the most wicked problems. But over the years, as I've kind of and as I've observed UN SDGs, one thing that you hear at the end of every conference, or let's say every event, is the fact that we need data, or we need big data for us to overcome UN SDGs, or for us to address UN SDGs. And if you remember the first slide that I presented, so big data, which is often referred to as the data that's too large to fit in a typical Excel spreadsheet, has been an ongoing kind of maybe promise that a lot of experts and a lot of organizations are kind of trying to either strike towards, or they're using it as an excuse for us not to be able to maybe address certain things. So if the data is the solution, and if we do need data to address this, the question is, do we have enough data? Do we have the right amount of data? And of course, if you're familiar about any conversations around this, the reality is that we do not. Um, Recently, actually, about a year ago, I was listening to on the UN Statistics channel. I was listening to a talk by David Jensen, who's the regional coordinator of the UN Environmental Program in Europe. And what he was saying was really stunning, which is that we only have data to address 40% of UN SDGs. So imagine we come together and we agreed on the 17 goals. We have beautiful graphics to separate one from another, but the reality is that we only have data to address 40% of these. And what David Jensen was building on is the fact that a lot of these data gaps come from either coverage data gaps, timeliness data gaps, stakeholder data gaps, or accessibility data gaps. So what do we mean by coverage? So this is lack of availability of spatial data. Timeliness is temporal data. Stakeholders are so people that are really going to be impacted, or people that are really going to be making decisions. We don't have the right information for engaging them or for connecting them. And actually, this last one, I added that, which is an accessibility data, because sometimes you do have the right people in the room and they do have the right data, but they're not making the data accessible beyond that point. And I've been to many different meetings where there's the right funding, there's the right wheel, you have the right paper. It's just nobody is thinking about what happens to the data afterwards. An example of this was in 2020, when there was a large amount of dead fish that appeared in Biscayne Bay in Miami. I was all of a sudden, as somebody who creates data visualization, in meetings with people from NOAA and NASA, et cetera, and research leaders from different universities, but nobody really was thinking about what happens to data afterwards. So I think these are 4 critical gaps for us to think about. And as we are thinking about a future of spaces that we're designing and data that we're engaging in the process of design, or data that our design will be generating, it's important to think about addressing these gaps. So the question is, why is it critical to commit to continuous and accessible data practices? And for me, everything goes back to this one information representation. So this one information representation, which is called Keeling curve, is the longest documented track record of data that we have up to this day. So this is a record that shows continuous documentation of CO2. It was a part of a project where Keeling, as a PhD student at Caltech, developed the instrument for tracking CO2, and over the years he was able to devise basically a sensing station in Biayna in observatory in Hawaii, and it created this longest documentation of data. And if you think about this, when we talk about CO2, when we talk about, let's say, issues surrounding carbon, often carbon is used, CO2 is used to solely talk about whether, as a measure of, let's say, as a measure of how well we're doing with maybe issues surrounding sustainability. And it's really interesting how our issues surrounding pollution and around sustainability have come down to kind of one element, which is CO2. And the reason for that is that this curve over the years has been used by political parties, both sides of the aisle, to argue for and against environmental policies. So if you look at this curve, which is from this great book called Behind the Curve, here we're talking about critical kind of milestone in the U.S. Political trajectory and how that leads to kind of these ups and downs. And what's really fascinating about this curve, it talks about how both Republican and Democratic parties have used this to, as I mentioned, argue for or against policy. So we're all guilty. We all use data like this to push for certain agendas, to eliminate certain agendas, and we just need to do better. But I just wanted to share that if we look at in this case, a 67-year-old data, there's so much kind of weight and politics that's behind this one representation. Now, of course, rethinking existing architecture and urban systems is critical, and often these issues are very, very nuanced and complicated. For the first part of my PhD, I mainly decided to focus on air pollution. And part of that was if over the years we have kind of isolated all the issues, and if we're kind of isolated the elements, can I start to understand different civic engagement trends, certain relationship between socio-technical systems just by focusing on a few elements. So my journey started by starting to understand the complexity of air in cities. And in this case, I was working with a dear colleague, Maider Yaguno, who at the time was studying at ETH Zurich and actually also doing her doctorate. And along with that, we were first trying to understand the complexity of air and our built environment, and understanding that actually this is a very nuanced relationship, and how in architecture and in urban design we create architectural fixtures, how much we extend, let's say, a balcony versus an overhang could drastically change our relationship to microclimate. So it's not about, let's say, one number or one set of guidebooks that determine everything, but these decisions are very interconnected and very complex. And at the same time, we started to look at, in this case, the way that maybe in architecture schools we teach about environmental issues and data. So if you're using Rhino Grasshopper, and if you're taking a course that's maybe about environmental systems, or you have a studio that is requiring you to do sun study or other types of studies, you might be working with plugins like Ladybug Honeybee and other kind of extensions of that. You might be working with others like Diva, etc. But pretty much you're going to use a software that uses database that is maybe, let's say, in state of New York, it's getting its weather data from these stations. And these stations basically give you a set of values, and then you plug it into your geometry, and then you have an output. And then at the end, you conclude, well, if I increase this, if I decrease these, then that's kind of the result of my geometry. But the reality is that this information currently that we have is an estimation. and we still don't have let's say, right amount of resolution of data for create these decisions in a local level. But we usually have a general, pretty, I would say, acceptable rule of thumb at this case to do our design. So this is, again, still a very good way for us to engage with this, but I think it's important to think about that we actually still don't have very local data, and that's okay. So in this case, with students at Columbia University, we were looking at, again, how to create different forms of geometry that respond to that. So going back to where we get our data, typically these weather stations, if they're, let's say, sponsored by cities or by organization or by an airport, they look like this. So as you can see here, these are usually placed in idealized locations, so locations that are away from the city, but they're because they're quite expensive. You can begin to do high resolution monitoring. Alternative to that, if we're looking at site work or field work, where maybe this is something you're doing as part of your studio, you go to a site, you start to document information. That information could be definitely more accurate, but it could be time consuming. So here I was teaching a course in American University of Armenia, where we wanted to look at relationship between vegetation and air pollution, but we realized that, well, Armenia is part of former Soviet Union. Data was extremely politicized, so the city doesn't actually have proper GIS layers. So we created a mobile app where students, throughout the workshop, they walked around the city and documented every single tree, their canopy information, etc. So although it was time consuming, we were able to create our own data set. Or here with students at Southern California Institute of Architecture at SCI-Arc, we were looking at how to maybe combine these methods, in addition to documenting trees on site, also start to think about ways that we can correlate information. So here we created a dashboard where you could look at the location of trees in top view. You can look at a first person kind of an animation, and at the same time, we were also showing the relationship between CO2. So all these exercises that are looking at the relationship between data and how we are sensing information, along with my colleague Maite Yaguno, we classified them in these 4 different categories. And here we're looking at the relationship between local and remote, and static and mobile. And in this case, we're looking at relationship of sensor to the environment that it's sensing. And this is the classifications that we've been using to kind of categorize our projects. So we look at, for instance, the local static sensor is an example of a weather station, where in this case you have weather stations that are costly, you require experts to run them, and they give you high temporal resolution, right? You're able to say sample every 1 second, every 20 millisecond, whatever that might be. But it gives you low spatial resolution because, again, you're sampling a specific point. Versus example, for instance, with students at SCI-Arc, where we're walking around and we're collecting the data, that's an example of maybe a lower cost maybe system that gives you low temporal resolution, right? Because we're not sampling the same location multiple times, but it gives you high spatial resolution because we're able to cover a larger resolution. And depending on how you want to engage with the environment and what type of data you want to create, maybe you want to focus one or the other, but maybe we can start to look at combination methods that over time you are trying to bridge these gaps between spatiality and temporality. Now, this exercise of collecting sensors using mobile devices is not a new practice. So Tony Chandler engaged in this practice in London. London as the first industrial city. In this case, was a great case study for Chandler to create, basically attach sensors to cars and begin to document the city. And at the same time, beginning to think about how layering information visualization, and whether these are topographic information or along with, let's say, different zoning information, is a practice that's been repeated over the years. And we are starting to see value in layering this information and maybe creating tools that are built on maybe GIS and remote sensing capabilities, but also allow for us to manipulate based on what it is that we're looking for. One project that's been really inspiring over the years is this project conducted at ETH Zurich called Open Sense Project, where, as you could clearly see on the right side, we're looking at how a resolution map of a city could over time increase just by having these buses that are roaming around the city with sensors. So Zurich as a city that has a really robust ground transportation engaged in this kind of practice of creating increasing resolution over time. So that was the inspiration, along with other projects, such as a project called the Copenhagen Wheel Project by Sensible City Lab, where in this case, by just kind of this promise of, well, if you replace one of your bicycle wheels with a wheel that has sensors integrated, can we start to engage citizens with process of data collection and participation? So these have been important projects along the way. So what I've tried to do in the past years is to create a workflow which is looking at how combination of dynamic sensing and static sensing and engaging with different stakeholders at the same time, being inspired by participation incentives from game theory that could be either activism based, reward based, entertainment based, or research based, could possibly allow us to contribute to maybe addressing these data gaps, but at the same time communicate information that we are gathering and we're sharing with the general public. And as you could see here, storytelling is something that's brought in from my recent years engaging with cinema and media. And whether that eventually leads to policy, of course, we have a long way to go, but that's definitely the desire to bridge these gaps. So some of the projects that I'll be sharing today are looking at initially, how do you even begin to assemble kits that are doing the sensing? And then also, how do you at the same time thinking about information representation? So I'll be sharing some of these. And the very first playground for me was where I was studying and teaching at the time, which was University of Southern California in downtown Los Angeles. So Los Angeles has a very long history of struggling with air pollution, and the first Clean Air Act was established in Los Angeles, and the kind of requirement to pass smog check, etc., is kind of entangled with history of the city. So, as a first exercise, I was interested in creating these modular sensing kits that were using Arduino microcontroller and out of box sensors. And I was interested in the design of this box that, on one hand, you could maybe attach a camera to the beginning. So, as you can see, it has this arms for attaching camera or a thermal camera, or you can also flip it and attach to a drone. So, the very first one, I just took a box that I had in the lab and then created a real-time visualization and asked a colleague who was biking around campus. And actually, the second visualization was created, in this case, convincing two colleagues to bike around campus and creating this visualization and processing platform, which allowed us to not only integrate GIS data, but also integrate real-time data. And here we were only looking at one parameter, which was temperature. But we thought, well, maybe temperature is not, it's not looking at the temperature alone, it's not, it doesn't give you much information. But what if we layer that temperature along with CO2? So if you think about, if you remember this box, so we created a very simple visualization which only looked at two parameters. So color temperature of the video is the temperature variation that was sensed in each location. And the pixelation size is determined by the CO2 level that was detected again on each side. So here we're looking at on the sped up video, somebody who's exiting the campus, going towards the freeway. And as you could see, the pixels are becoming larger. So that indicates higher CO2 tracking. And then as the person continues the journey, you see that, well, maybe sometimes it's not always one-to-one. But then a closer study of, in this case, different maybe matrix from the campus, in the upper left corner, you see more of maybe a smaller pixel size and more bluish tint. So that indicates maybe better lower temperature and better lower CO2. And that's quite evident because, as you could see, there's a higher concentration of trees and there's a pretty maybe balanced relationship between impervious and pervious surface versus as the person is maneuvering the campus and exiting, there's a higher relationship of impervious surface, lower vegetation, etc. So this is where we're starting to see this difference. At the same time, this device allowed us to attach it to drones. And this sensing kit was tried in Los Angeles and in Shanghai as another city that I've spent a lot of time exploring. And here you're looking at one of the instances where we're scanning one of the main buildings on USC campus. And again, this two variables of color and pixelation size is telling you, in this case, as the elevation increases, CO2 decreases and color and temperature decreases. At the same time, there was a lot of user testing done to kind of hone in the visualization. And we realized actually when we show the graph on the right side along the visualization, people also had a maybe better sense. And it's interesting, when the drone went up and it cleared, people sometimes would release a sigh of relief because, and then as you kind of would go lower again, it becomes foggier and more difficult to see. So it was interesting because this was kind of beginning to think about how this type of visualization could also be evocative, and it could create kind of emotions and expressions. So here we're looking at a modernist building on campus, and on the top it's facing a courtyard. On the bottom one is facing an entrance gate. So the same building, but again, we clearly see the difference. So as we studied different buildings across campus, we came up with this map. So this is an interpolation of different findings, horizontal and vertical scanning. And we were trying to kind of locate which were maybe the least polluted or more polluted corners. And actually this number 3 is a really interesting one because we identified that as the most polluted corner on campus. And after a lot of study, we went back there and we were looking at maybe relationship to vegetation, to surface type, and many different things, and realized that actually what caused this area to be very polluted, it had nothing to do with its architectural or maybe urban design decisions, but it had to do with direction of the traffic lights. And that was a really interesting moment in this research where it was the realization that maybe as an architect, as an urban planner, you could do all you can and you can make all the right moves. But if whoever's programming the traffic light is not in conversation with rest of the decisions, all of the good work could go to waste. So all this could be is just a simple conversation where, well, what if we attach a sensor? And what if we have a smart traffic light, which is able to release tension in the city anytime that we have this congestion? So this was an opportunity for me to start a conversation with university's provost. And a lot of projects came out of this, some positive, some negative, where we were also told that, well, we don't want to maybe share this information because what happens if the parents of students see this information as they're dropping off their kids, etc. But the attitude of the school has changed quite a lot since this research was conducted. So one day I have a hope to do an exhibition at USC where maybe we can track the change over time, but let's see. So going back to this workflow, I kind of continued this work, and we were given an opportunity to engage on a number of NSF grants based on this work. And what came out of it was a research innovation grant with my colleague Biayna Yaguna and my advisor and her advisor to engage in maybe more robust data collection. Sorry, can you hear me? I think somebody's. All right, I'm going to continue. So we built on the previous project, and the idea here was to engage with another polluted city, which in this case was Seoul in South Korea. And as part of the Architecture Biennale, we created these more maybe robust sensing kits where they were highly designed and calibrated, but also we created these high pole magnets where at any point we could attach to different mobile station. And the reason why we were excited to work in the city of Seoul was at the time in 2016, 2017, Seoul was going through a really critical political point where in previous conversations about pollution, the government would always blame maybe China for its pollution and talk about how the pollution is something that's, broad through winds, through prevailing winds to the city. But the mayor, as part of the election bid in 2016, kind of promised that he would do something about this. And what that created was a lot of opportunities to engage with the government, to access data, and create these kind of connect to the inner city buses. So what you're looking at here is we were able to work with the city and attach these sensing kits, pretty literally climb up and attach this on top of the buses that were then roaming around the city for a few months. And this was while we were exhibiting the visualization in space. And we created a website which was monitoring where the buses were and where the information was being collected. And at the same time, we were given access to 30 years of weather information from the city to visualize them. So I'm going to go forward. And one of the apps was inspired by the app at USC, where we use color gradients and location tracking to give you access to either the nearest bus that was roaming or the nearest weather station. And the other example was an augmented reality app, which used a 2-meter by 2-meter GIS map of the city to create these pollution clouds over the city. So it's very difficult to communicate augmented reality when you capture it in video. But in this case, City of Seoul has 25 districts, and each district had kind of a pollution cloud over it.
You need
And
to,
what
can
you'll
you,
see,
I cannot go into my office. And
yes, I think somebody is unmuted. So
Sorry, Mona, can you make sure that your phone is muted?
right, I will continue. And in this case, you were able to look at different parameters.
I need to
and
get in,
over
but I
time,
can't go in because it creates interference, because this is also recording. So please wait here with my camera.
Okay, so here you could see that different participants from different ages were able to look at the installation. And of course, like many kind of data representation examples, what you realize over time is that you need more time, you need more data. And that was the unfortunate conclusion. But we were able to do another version of this in New York City, where data was kind of captured, and then that was correlated with different level of vegetation in different parts of the city. So I'm going to switch to quickly to my website. I will quickly share with you a project which was kind of combining this interest in mobile media and environmental tracking. So here I'm taking you to my website if you're interested in visiting. And this specific project aimed to pretty much bring together all the past projects that I shared. So inspired by Pokemon Go and building on a similar structure, I created this project called USC Air. And this project begins by first kind of sharing the location of the campus. As I spoke about it, it's situated in a high traffic and polluted area of the city. And it's building on an existing Internet of Things IoT technology, where it allowed us to devise number of sensors across campus and then create a mobile augmented reality app, which was designed to guide students to different locations of the campus, and along the way, allow them to suggest different changes or different interventions that they might want to propose or share their experience. So here you see one of the students is being guided to the nearest sensing kit, and the arrow on top, it pretty much, it's like playing hot and cold. It tells you how far you are. So here you'll see one of the students discovering one of the work in progress sensors, and they're able to see pretty much what's inside each of the sensing boxes. And in this case, right now I have the audio off, but you're able to hear what each box entails and why it's important to monitor each of these elements separately, but also together. And once they're able to unlock one of these boxes, they're given access to, in this case, other features such as scanning their student card and see where other sensors are distributed or on campus. So here you're holding a mini campus, and by clicking on each of these points of data collection, you're able to see weekly trends. And what was interesting about this project was after multiple survey and conversations, we realized that actually students on campus were, although they cared about the topic, but they were more interested in weekly trends, as that correlated with the decisions they had to take for them to engage in transportation in relation to their classes. So students very much, when they're in school, they do think about their life in a weekly or semester-based cases, and at any point they could take a photograph of this and share this on social media. So I'm going to go back to my presentation. I am mindful of time, so we should be able to finish on time. So after this project, I started an assistant professorship at Florida International University in Miami, where I was very much also interested in taking what I learned from City of LA and apply it to City of Miami. Here, with our lab, we engaged in a number of funded projects, which allowed us to think about public engagement and role of interactive and immersive media and physical computing in this conversation. So for instance, we created a device called Water Wand that allowed citizens to engage in water pollution monitoring, or created kind of more narrative-based experiences for kids. This is one of the examples of an interactive website, which it tells you information about fish kill, which is a very important element that happens when the temperature increases and dissolved oxygen decreases. So work with scientists there to monitor, in this case, one of their mobile sensing efforts, which was done using boats. And over time, I engaged in a number of these efforts to kind of document what other scientists were doing or what we were creating. This is the Water One project that I talked about. So I would put together students in architecture and environmental and electrical and environmental engineering to create devices like this. But at some point, I was very much interested in putting all of these efforts together, and we had a grant from National Science Foundation to create a traveling exhibition that could engage different stakeholders. So this project called In Deep Water is using a head-mounted display, so which is it's known as HoloLens, in this case HoloLens 2, and using Unity game engine, we created an experience where we were able to collect information from the participants. So in this case, their environmental literacy about the topic, but also demonstrate different efforts and engage with different sensors. So I'm going to share this video. There's an audio component, but I'll talk over it. So this was a traveling exhibition, which was tested in Miami and Los Angeles. What you see here is recording from the HoloLens, but also audience. So they begin by taking a survey, and that also kind of allows them to learn how to navigate the interface. Then they're encouraged to look at a map, 2D map of, in this case, downtown Miami, which overlays a very high resolution 3D map, which we generated using a Blender hack that allows you to import GIS. And here you're looking at how NOAA sea level rise prediction is overlaid with this information. So there's an audio component as well. So as the sea level rise as sea level increases, audio also increases, making this a very immersive experience. So we can think about this maybe as a three-dimensional GIS information, but what was powerful about this specific headset was the capability to connect to also real-time sensors. So similar to what you saw in example in Seoul, we were able to connect to a number of buoys. So this is location of the sensors that are collecting information from the river, from the bay. This is one of the buoys where There are a lot of research done with these buoys, and basically the user is able to understand, and they can put their head inside or hear about the stories of this. There's also other information where actually over time I was given many other layer types to add. So here you're looking at understanding the river versus the bay, kind of an overview of the difference between saltwater and brackish water, and the fact that constantly monitoring this is quite critical. But the main thing that I was excited to contribute to was this community engagement layer, which using eye gaze tracking, you were kind of, as you were looking at each image, it would tell you a story about different community engagement efforts that we did. In this case, you're looking at me demonstrating and a mobile augmented reality app, which engaged with the map. And we did a demonstration of that in one of the events that we hosted. So this piece was also accompanied by different screens. So as you were looking at different position, it would tell you to, well, pay attention to this screen and that screen. It was created to be used with 3 different HoloLens headsets. But as people were waiting to engage with this, also they could engage with the data that was displayed on the screen. So I was able to user test this with 200 people in Miami and LA, and the general assumption, the general takeaway was that people in Miami were engaged with the piece a little bit longer, and that could be attributed to their familiarity with the topic, or the fact that, unfortunately, when it comes to environmental issues, our foresight is often limited by whether this is happening immediately to us. So even participants in Miami, immediately they wanted to know whether they live within the boundary. And if they didn't, they were asking me if I'm going to extend the project to include where they live. So I think that's an interesting observation. So the next phase of this is including actually a larger map and different coastal cities. And that's something that we're working on, that we're hopefully will be able to demo next year. I'm gonna end by talking about a few other very brief projects. So this is a project that's it's an ongoing project we have right now. And I'm going to actually mute. I'm not sure if you can hear the audio, but it's funded by Dr. Seuss Foundation, and it's to teach kids about environmental literacy. We're working with computational neuroscientists from UC San Diego, and we're looking at situated learning. So basically learning on site, and we're mainly focusing on Balboa Park in San Diego, which is quite critical to biodiversity of the region. So this is an ongoing project. Another project working with FIU School of Linguistics, and we created this project during COVID, which allowed us to connect 1,400 students in Miami and in North Africa, including in Egypt, in Algeria, and in Morocco, to teach them about language learning, but then using environmental education as the underlying current. So we used very low cost gears. We shipped thousands of headsets to different locations in North Africa for students to go and pick them up. Same thing in Miami, and they were able to over Zoom use these $5 cardboard kind of headsets to connect and talk about these different issues. I'm very proud of this project in terms of number of students that we were able to reach. At the same time, in my current role at Arizona State University, I get to teach in classrooms that are fully immersive. And although the technology, in this case, we're working with Dreamscape Learn, where we're able to have 25 students in the classroom. And currently this technology is being incorporated to teach biology 101, chemistry 101, and I teach a full semester course in this, where we're able to basically design experiences for this. So although the technology here is quite advanced, but the questions that we're asking, whether this is using a $5 Google Cardboard and an open source software, or a $10 million facility, the questions are the same. The challenges are the same. Reaching out, making sure that we are designing for our stakeholder, our audience, and are the same. So I'm very much excited to see what type of projects we could do with this facility. The last thing I'll talk about in the next few minutes is some of the other ongoing projects that are working with learning scientists to particularly study learning in these environments. So in the previous examples, I would classify them under engagement, where I am interested in people participating with the technology, but maybe the assessment was maybe secondary. And the type of audience that were engaged with the tools were more open-ended. And in this case, we have a particular audience, which is architecture, which is students in architecture, engineering, and construction. So for the past 5 years with my colleagues at FIU and University of Irvine, we've been looking at how learning and different maybe parameters of learning could be estimated or assessed using head-mounted displays. So this very first project in 2020, we were looking at using Magic Leap, a headset, to estimate students' confidence when it comes to, in this case, teaching robotic arms. And what we were looking at is their eye gaze and their engagement with the topic based on how we asked the question. More recently, we are looking at how to incorporate machine learning and natural language processing in the game-based environment that we're designing. And particularly the aim here is to make teaching robotics a little bit easier, because as you know, right now this is costly and maybe dangerous. And I'm gonna skip over this quickly, but the aim here is to ultimately think about how teaching this technology could lead to better sustainable construction. And this research started off by first doing a survey of the field. And this is some of the interesting findings, which is user robots is the getting rid of 3Ds, which is the dull, dangerous, and dirty tasks. And some of our other findings after conducting a summit was that maybe virtual reality could be something that's used in the beginning stages of training. So in this case, it could focus more on safety and introductory. And what you see here is the first phase of this. This was created in 2019 as a demo. And then we then perhaps think about augmented reality or mixed reality as a way to more engaging with more advanced tools. So here you're looking at a demonstration we created as a starting point, start to think about, well, how do we even begin to create this environment? So this specific version particularly look at training with KUKA KR10 in this case. And this workflow use RoboDK to connect to Unity. And then the goal here was to explore how maybe a teach pendant interface could be translated to a user interface and how we can track their learning. In a more recent version, which is this is a working version right now, we're in the 3rd year of this research. We created 6 costume modules, which allows you to log into a website, kind of take certain introductory courses as an interactive media on a website. And once you complete each of them, you're able to then come to the lab and then complete the virtual reality version. So this effort has been, we are able to do micro-credentialing with this lessons and with this curriculum. And the micro-credentialing currently is done in FIU in Miami, but we're working on also doing micro-credentialing with this content at ASU. And for us to create this, basically, we initially had to create the curriculum using a physical robot, and then create the tasks, and then do a version with more kind of pass-through capabilities, and then completely move on to virtual reality. And one thing we're using here is a Think Aloud protocol, which we're encouraging people to repeat their understanding of the subject out loud. So we're recording their audio. And that allows us to, for instance, when they are telling us for speed, for sure, like the heavier ball was easier to move faster, or in other things. So we are looking for certain key phrases that they're using in their Think Aloud response to the lesson. And we're able to then look at our data and then compare it with others, and then ultimately merge the data and arrive to a level of understanding that they have. At the same time, we have another team that's looking at spatial relationship to the topic. So here we're looking at, for instance, a payload and acceleration topic where you're using a robotic arm and a pedal to move balls with different mass. And we're starting to understand how maybe their spatial positioning in virtual reality could tell us about maybe their confidence level. And at the end, these two tracks are merging together to tell us about maybe somebody's learning. So this is an ongoing research, but what this kind of shows you is the capability of the technology, and you might use it to only look at data. You might use it to maybe for entertainment, for communicating your design, but there's all this other maybe aspects of the extended reality research that you can engage with. So I'm going to stop my talk here, and I'll see if there's a possibility for us to do a Q&A. I'm not sure what the setup is, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you so much, Biayna. I'm kind of behind the computer here, but I have our camera turned towards the room. So I'd love to open it up if like any of the students here have questions, or again, if anyone that's joined the live stream also has questions, you know, feel free to ask. Anyone? Okay, Ayush, we have a question here.
Yeah.
We'll see if you can hear. Do you want to start asking and we'll see?
Yeah, the project you showed with
Can you hear that, Biayna?
Yes, I
Okay.
think so.
yeah,
That's right.
showed about Miami and like bringing in different layers and being able to see it on the lens. First of all, it was really good. I'm more interested in the community engagement layer. Like, how are you able to bring up like pop-ups and like layering different information along with like the 3D model and of course the environmental issue. How did you do that? Like, can you just walk us through that?
Sure. I'll be happy to. I'm going to share my screen and go back to that slide, and I'm going to hope you could see my slides right now. I'll go back to that layer. So you're asking about the community engagement layer. I can also maybe I can answer this technically, and then so in this case, the geometry was created in Blender, which is an open source software, and it has really great plugins to create 3D objects. So I'm usually working between Rhino, Grasshopper, and Blender. And so technically, all the geometry was created in Blender or Rhino, and then eventually we exported to Unity game engine. And that's kind of the workflow. And then we connected this to either we created the interaction by scripting in Unity, or then creating to different databases. You use it, MQTT protocol, and a few other things. Now, for the community layer, I would say that this project, as in the current state, is in a very early stage. Basically, what you have right now is just layers on and off. So right now, it's tracking my eye gaze. So HoloLens headset, as soon as you put it on, it actually detects whether you've used the device before. So it calibrates for your eyes, and that helps you in better spatial grabbing and spatial interaction. But what that allowed me to do is, like, if somebody was just interested in this location, I had geolocated certain experiences. So for instance, this one was part of a cruise. So I did this demo of augmented reality on a cruise ship that was taking us down Biscayne Bay and then stopping in certain locations and telling us about the coral reef and different animals. So on purpose, if you think about this spatially, this one is anchored in the middle of the bay, right? So it was geolocated to communicate a specific story that happened in that location. Or let me go forward. So in this case, gonna see if let's say this one This one was a low-cost surface drone that we were working on, and it was capturing, in this case, the photo was taken in a very specific location. So I had it in a way where, you know, if you were to draw a line, it would be the view that you're looking at. But ultimately, the red boundary means that it's recognizing that your eye is looking at that. It was a little bit tricky calibrating this. And then once you were looking at that, then I would tell you that story. It's a little bit like when you have a gallery and somebody comes and say, well, tell me about this poster, or tell me about that poster. So I was using this interaction to kind of take them to different parts of the map. But I think this layer, it could do much more. I'm gonna actually go to the second part. I think I skipped over this. And this one specifically, they're looking at the water wand, which was this device, as I mentioned. And I'm gonna move forward. You can see that at some point it's telling you to go and grab one of the sensors. So this is where this becomes truly mixed reality, right? So you're merging the physical and digital. And if you were picking this up, then it would continue to tell the story. So it's basically, if you had the image, it would ask you to go and grab this physical thing. Once you had the physical thing, it would continue to tell the story, right? So this is where you could create this hybrid, and your kind of studio is about hybridity. Now, whether we call it hybrid or mixed reality, this is where you could pretty much engage with your different participants, whether there's a learning outcome at the end, or whether this is more of an individual takeaway. This is where you could possibly engage with the both digital and physical, right? But the main criteria for this was that I had to be able to travel with this. So all I had to do was to kind of just show up with a 2D map. Which that was a good constraint for me to have. And that was a learning that happened from the project in Seoul, right? Because with the project in Seoul, if you remember with the air pollution clouds, I only had a 2-meter by 2-meter map. Everything else was a digital layer. So imagine if you could take your final project and present in different settings. So sometimes these constraints could allow you to maybe do some creative things. But of course, there's the need to have the physical component as part of this digital layer is quite critical, hence the title of your studio.
So super exciting work, really. I mean, I'm also now seeing why Melissa thought we should all get together. Andrew, Bogosian, and myself, we did actually a series of community center urban sensing projects. And I really loved the screen that you showed at the beginning of the presentation, where you had the metrics of remote and local data collection, and then the one that was static and the one that was mobile. We did the mobile local collection, data collection. So, and it seems that this is really citizen friendly because it's low cost and very often variables. So one question I have is, in your experience, and maybe it's too early to draw these conclusions, but are these immersive environments that allow citizens to actually see data or experience data collection, environmental data collection in a different way? Is this empowering citizens to join the effort of local data collection? And I'm specifically considering in this context, for example, heat data that create microclimates. I mean, our cities are burning, and depending on microclimate, it becomes really dangerous, specifically for elderly people, for non-humans that are living closer to the ground, or for children. So did you see a shift in citizen awareness and citizen engagement because of these new technologies?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And that's, I have the slide up so students could remember this. So here we're looking at different classification. And again, this is, just one way to talk about this, right? Here, the relationship of sensor to movement. And I completely agree that also local mobile sensing, or however we want to call this, it's a great way to engage community. Just like I showed the case studies that they had in Zurich, etc. I'm going to go back to a diagram that I had, and I'm going to answer this question with, let me see if I could elegantly do this instead of going through all the slides. And I'm gonna, okay, here we go. So I think that's the goal, of course, to use these tools for engagement and hopefully action, because it's interesting because right now there's a lot of conversation around how engagement is not good enough. And the reason why I use this term is the fact that I still haven't been able to assess or measure the impact. And I don't feel I don't feel worthy to say that this work is trying to do that. It's definitely a desire and it's what I'm striving for eventually, but definitely it's not there yet. But I think I wanted to bring up this diagram because I want to highlight this section, which is about participation incentive. And I quickly glaze over this. So from game theory, for people to engage, they either need to engage in a research. So just like, we do the research, we care about it, or it's activism. So when you're creating this type of media, there's always, a number of people that are going to show up. They're going to download the app. They're going to go to protests, and you always have that audience there, right? But it's not a growing number. There's the reward where, for instance, if you monetize certain things, so if there's an incentive to get solar panels, if there's an incentive to do certain things, you're going to expand your pool. But also one of the other ones is entertainment. So that's the kind of interest in starting to think about mechanisms such as what Pokemon Go was built on, where all of a sudden you have an explosion of, citizens who are, collecting information, generating information, but without really kind of contextualizing in any other way. But maybe if we think about combination of these things, because again, the activists are always going to show up, but can you make this appealing to others? But the other thing I wanted to mention is the reality that in the past few years, and part of what I'm teaching here is focus on future studies. And as part of future studies, we know that foresight is a very powerful tool where it could really drive people to, plan and, be engaged in systems that we might set up for this, or we might completely, detach them. And the example that I showed with In Deep Water Project, comparing it to the water issues in LA versus Miami. So of course, LA has severe water issues, right? But that information that is often related to the LA River and other things. So for some reason, people in Los Angeles, they don't see sea level rise as an urgency because there's other things such as fires and air pollution, smog, etc. Versus in Miami, because people live that reality at least once or twice a year, for them, they engage with the topic much easier. And that takes me to the graph that I was showing you, the Keeling curve, and how over time, as we have made things very kind of one element, right? So if we're just talking about CO2, that means we're talking about X, Y, and Z. This is really problematic where as we tend to simplify things, we tend to, going back to UN SDGs, just by assigning a diagram or creating, these logos, it doesn't mean that we have a way forward. So these things are way more nuanced. And I think these strategies for engaging with community have to be way more nuanced. So I think people care, but they tend to care more when it's in their backyard, unless we have a way to overcome this communication bridge and talk about maybe the local and global at the same time. But I don't think I'm doing that. It's definitely a desire, but if there's a way that your team and students want to find a way that we collaborate and see how we can overcome that, that's the goal here. Thank you.
I maybe just have one kind of final question that we can end on. I mean, I completely agree. I think this work is super exciting, interesting. I love the sort of interactive components with the community. From our perspective in the studio, I'm kind of curious, like a lot of what you talk about, I appreciate your transparency to talk about sort of funding and sort of the processes that make a lot of this possible. And it's clear that a lot of this takes a lot of time and work and understanding in terms of like software development and maybe even other types of design or other disciplines other than design. So I'm kind of curious, you know, from your perspective, how the students can start to engage with this in a pretty, again, very more introductory way, and how they can actually fold it into their design processes in the scope of this studio. And if you have any sort of tips for how it can be used in terms of design. We are going to be working with Melissa and Trevor with the HoloLens, and I think in particular Hologram. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
But yeah, if you could maybe just speak to, you know, where to start with some of this stuff, and kind of what is achievable and maybe an introductory capacity in relation to design.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wanna just kind of maybe the first slide that I was sharing, it takes a lot of effort, and it's not straightforward because there's the promise of mixed reality, VR and AR, but the reality is that still this software and hardware is in early stages, although they've been in research for 7 years, and definitely in there's been mass access for the past definitely in 10 years in a more accessible way. But it takes a long time to develop this technology, and it requires a lot of patience, and it requires also an open mind and an understanding that, well, let me think about what I'm trying to communicate, maybe in a diagram first, in a sketch first, and then let's see if we can build this, because a lot of these interactions will require you to develop, let's say, a custom feature or a custom script, and those things take a long time. Yesterday, with my researchers and students here with one team, all day we were trying to get something working, which we had working the day before, but it could be many dependencies. So don't get discouraged. I think Rhino Grasshopper and Hologram, which is an add-on in Rhino, is a great way to start engaging with the tools, because Rhino is a meta tool similar to Blender, where you can import and export many different types. A lot of the data visualizations that I showed, the early ones, are using Grasshopper data visualization capabilities and just hiding the screen capture logo in the image cropping or those things. So I think the first thing will be just developing computational thinking and excitement and aptitude, and then jump right in. For the hardware development, maybe that's not something you're interested in, but as part of my PhD journey, I realized that if I wanted to take electrical engineering courses at USC, I had to pay a certain amount of money, and I had to take some introductory courses. So I went to a community college that I heard 3 engineers from NASA JPL were going to teach a course, a capstone course, and I sat there for 2 years to learn how to put my own sensors together. And I still know enough to, start something, but then collaborate with something. So just know that, like, it is, this is if we do want to overcome and contribute to our field with these things, don't get discouraged, and just know that it's going to take a while, because you might need to pick up networking a little bit, in this case, or, a little bit of hardware, a little bit of software for you to achieve what you want to do. But you're in great hands, and I know that Melissa is very excited about potential of mixed reality and relationship of that to making. And the other thing is also developing a network where you could reach out and ask questions. But I also want you to know that there's nothing wrong with using out-of-box solutions such as Adobe Aero. So Adobe has, as part of the suite, it has a product called Adobe Aero. I think it's a really great, stable product. For some reason, people weren't excited about using it until in 2020, the Bernie memes came out. So people started to create AR examples with using Bernie Sanders meme, but then kind of the software pickup. There's great solutions also in architecture. I used to be a CTO of a company called Augmentexture, which had a plugin for Rhino and for Revit. So there are a lot of out-of-box things, especially for mobile AR, that you could use. Same thing with VR, but you have my information. Email me if you have any questions, or just look at this as a worthwhile investment, because these technologies are not going away, and they really give us sometimes superpower to communicate things like what I showed you with being able to stand in front of a policymaker or a provost and tell them, hey, like, can we do something about this traffic light? Something that I usually wouldn't be able to do as an architect, right? Because I had the proof, because I had the information, or I could do that. But just don't get discouraged. There's definitely in interdisciplinary research and what your studio is trying to strive, there's a lot of power. So I'm going to keep repeating myself here, but do reach out if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And this was a great lecture. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, looking forward to maybe visiting in person one day. So I've heard so many great things about UVA and Melissa as a colleague. And the last thing I wanted to say is that there is a community of people that are doing this work in different conferences, and so Acadia organization is one of the ones that is really celebrating this interdisciplinary research. Next year's conference will be in Miami. We're hoping to have opportunities for student scholarship and student participation in person or remote. So it will take a community to do this work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Bye.